Good morning. My name is Amy Erixon. I am the leader of the Global Investment Management practice at Avison Young. And my counterpart here is Sheila Botting, who I think everyone knows. She's the senior partner and Canadian real estate leader of Deloitte's real estate practice, and we're the co-chairs of the 2019 RealTrends conference. We're excited about the focus of the conference because we're going to talk about not only the latest trends, but the underlying technologies and factors that are causing this to be the most exciting time of our real estate careers. So joining us today are about 300 building owners, developers, investors, lawyers, brokers, and other intermediaries across the Canadian real estate market. The experts are prepared to share their insights into the key trends in the investment, leasing, legal, capital markets, and technology industries across all of the asset classes, along with emerging topics like where are we on cannabis? Our thanks to the many organizations who have supported this year's conference. Since everyone's received speaker biographies, which were sponsored by Denton's, we'll be doing abbreviated biographies and introductions this morning. This will enable us to shorten the program while still providing you with key background information. Our program begins this morning with Sheila and I giving a keynote, diving into insights into the key trends that lay ahead of us in terms of the real estate industry.
So our topics will be, what are the big global trends? What are the implications for the real estate industry? And then talking about some of the big use cases that we're seeing that are playing out in the various marketplaces. So over to you, Amy, to start off with, what are the big global trends?
Awesome. So this is the most important book I've read this year on this topic, and I highly recommend it. Thomas Friedman is the New York Times best-selling novelist and editorial commentarist, and this one's called Thank You for Being Late, but it's an optimist's guide to the world of new technology and exponential change. So he has two central theses in this book, both of which are perfectly germane to our presentation this morning. On the lower left, you can see he's talking about the relationship between society's ability to absorb change and the rate of exponentialism, particularly of technology. And he makes the thesis that around 2007, those lines crossed. And of course, the technology line is going more vertical. And while our ability to absorb this is improving, particularly with access to infinity information via our smartphones, we're lagging behind, particularly on the public policy front. And his notion here is that in order to get smarter fast enough to be able to properly deploy these technologies, we really have to get serious about installing continuous learning in all of our organizations and systems. The other key thesis he postulates is that the 20th century was a century of things, and people were really focused on products, bringing better products to market, being vertically integrated in terms of their suppliers. There were some leaders around supply chain management, but it was really about things, and that's how the big fortunes were made. He argues that the 21st century is really about flows, and those who control the flow of everything, whether that's goods, whether that's information, whether that's opinion leadership, that's how the big fortunes are being made, and they're being made extremely quickly because flows are readily scalable. So he also says that the three largest forces on the planet are technology, globalization, and climate change, and that no matter what industry you're in, those are the three pivotal points that are going to determine the outcome for us in the future. So we're going to roar through these on the front end, and we're going to spend a little more time in the middle on technology before we get to the use cases. So we had a discussion on the front end about all the different change agents, and there's plenty, and it's part of the reason why we feel like it's really difficult for the political class to wrestle this to the finish line, but we are going to focus on these three, which we agree with Thomas Friedman are the key to the future. We're also going to tell you why we think that these change agents are the most important and the most reason for optimism in terms of where we're headed with the world. So everyone's familiar with Canada's demographics. We've got a few critical advantages going into these changes. One is that our population is heavily urbanized. Another is that it's very well educated. We don't have a kind of scale of transformation that's required on the infrastructure front as many other countries in the world, but just the same we do need to address infrastructure. Our population is growing rapidly, particularly with well-educated immigrant class, and our greatest resource, our greatest single resource, is the land. And everyone knows this is the second biggest country in the world, but did you know that we have 2.46 billion acres of land? And something around 80% of that is still owned by the government, so we can do with it what we collectively will. Demographics are changing rapidly, and this is permeating into the real estate sector. 2 weeks ago, I gave the keynote at the Apartment Summit, and those of you who were there will recall that the number one thing that was underserved in terms of amenities in the Canadian apartment stock is washers and dryers. And after that presentation, a number of the managers and owners in the crowd came up to tell me afterwards that that really is an immigrant dynamic, and that with different religious composition in their buildings and their communities, that there's a need to set apart, and the cheap fix is have washers and dryers for people who have pets and ones who don't, because that is a cultural difference in the community, but that's just one illustration of how this is manifesting for the real estate sector. We also have an aging demographic profile that is going to become pretty serious if we don't maintain the immigrant profile that has been solving this problem to date. This is the most serious thing about the apartment tenant graphic information, which is that the affordability crisis is actually upon us. And worrisomely, it's also most severe for the youth in our nation who are going to be carrying those aging burdens that were featured on the last slide. Sadly, it looks like it's falling on the youth to also be the catalyst for political change. This is Greta Thunberg. She's scheduled to speak at the United Nations on September 23rd, and this upcoming Friday is her annual school strike for climate action. It's easy to see from this chart, which I borrowed from the Washington Post, why someone from Sweden would find this to be such an urgent problem. You can see that the temperature changes are already in excess of 2 degrees in Sweden, and in most of Canada, by the way. And in general, the way this works is that the farther north you are, the more severe the impacts. There are some other problematic things about this chart. For example, I did my summer vacation on Cape Cod this year, and you couldn't swim because of all the sharks, and you can see the little hot spot that runs from Boston to Nova Scotia. Those are the sorts of changes that people are starting to recognize, and I think will help to facilitate the urgency around climate action. Naysayers here in Canada say, and you can see on the chart on the right that this is true, that Canada is a trivial part of the overall global problem. We aren't making the kind of progress that we need to, but even if we wiped out our carbon emissions to zero, it wouldn't move the needle at the global scale. Still, our leadership is needed in order to start turning this boat around at the global level. On the chart on the left, you can see that sadly, Canada's GHG footprint per capita is the worst on the planet. So we're about 30% off our Paris targets at present, and we're 20% worse per capita than the Americans. And this also has largely to do with geography. We have such large spaces to cover, and we have also more intense climate than some of the countries that are located south of us, and that is what those things are attributed to. So I put together this chart, which is about sources and uses of Canadian emissions, because I think that they're inseparable. People like to point to the oil industry or to the car business and say, hey, those are the polluters. But the truth of the matter is, it's kind of like this circle that we have in the drug trade, where it's the users that are demanding these resources that are causing the source problems to emerge. Half of that problem is heating and cooling, mostly in buildings. And the rest is transportation, either getting those construction supplies to those sites or people to work. So we need to work together. It makes no sense for us to not be able to get, if we're going to burn carbon-based fuels, to get them here in Canada. Bringing them over from the Middle East is just compounding the transportation emissions here. These are problems that I am absolutely confident we can solve by thinking about this holistically, and we can get them solved here in Canada in the near term. So here's the facts, in case you don't know, of what it is that we've committed and where we stand today. We're at 708 metric tons of CO2 emissions, and we have committed to 500 by 2030. That's 30% reduction, but we've got a decade to do it. The estimates by the federal and international associations are about a $1.7 trillion annual investment will be required to get the whole world to the Paris targets. That sounds like a big number. Bill Gates argues that there's $7.4 trillion of annual benefits associated with making this investment. It's a really complicated equation that I'm not prepared to defend today, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody about this afterwards if you want to go into details. Already last year, we have sold $600 billion worth of green bonds, which is more than the decade prior. So we're closing that gap really quickly with the lowest interest rates ever in the history of the developed world. And we're also looking at ways, and there's an increasing urgency about this, to reduce the annual cost of climate-related damages and damage claims. And the insurance industry is starting to push back on buildings that are located in hazardous areas. So interestingly, the private sector is way ahead of the public sector on this initiative. These are companies that, in response in part to the TCFD, which is the Financial Stability Board's requirement that mega companies with revenues over $1 billion actually disclose their carbon footprints and also make a move toward a carbon-free operating system. These are the international companies that are leaders, and interestingly, many of them are based in the United States, where climate denialism is on the rise. So, in conclusion on this section, basically when we're talking about building buildings, when we're talking about design, construction, and setting up our operating procedures, we're at the cusp of being able to look at this more holistically and with the benefit of technology to help us move forward into the future to solve all of these noble problems. Over to you, Sheila.
Thank you. So the third pillar in the topic we're speaking about is about technologies. And as we know, disruptive technologies are pretty much changing everything around us. It's like somebody took a deck of cards, threw it up in the air, and said, where's it going to land? And we're trying to sort out now how those technologies will impact certainly our life, but more importantly, our real estate industry. And so you say, what is the implication of all of these trends for our real estate industry? So think about us in context. You know, if a technology is changing, call it every 18 months, and a business unit may go through some kind of a reorg or restructure every 3 years, and there may be an M&A activity every 7 years, then you think about our real estate. Our leases are 10, 15, 20 years, so therefore they're long-term leases. And then our assets are 40, 50, 60, 100 years old or older. So that means in our industry, we're used to building fixed structures and fixed assets over time, into which, how do you allow all of that change to take place? Then you layer on all the asset classes that we work with, whether it's office, retail, industrial, institutional, or residential. So think about the office asset class. You can now work anywhere, anytime, any place, with anybody in any way that you want. You know, people are becoming mobile. Hot desking is prevalent through many businesses. The same thing takes place in retail. Consumers can shop anywhere, anytime, any place. I can do my banking on my online mobile app, on a laptop, or whenever I decide to go into a physical bank, I can do that. All that stuff that we're buying online is ending up in our industrial supply chain. So hence, data analytics around the supply chain, the omni-channel, becomes incredibly important to drive the future and for the last mile. The institutional sector is also going through this similar transformation. We do a ton of work in this space, so whether it's the science and labs across Canada, whether it's schools and how you learn. Kids don't just learn in the classroom having people blasting notes at them all the time. There's actually an online component. Think about courthouses. Think about, you know, federal buildings and other buildings everywhere. And then the last component, of course, is residential, which we'll hear a lot about in the next section. But with increased urbanization, you saw that 75% of Canadians live in 30 of our top cities. The issue around affordability, access technology and infrastructure, and of course, the issues around densification, transit-oriented development. All these things have become very relevant. The question is, in the light of the changing technology, how do you future-proof our real estate and how do you future-proof our infrastructure and our cities overall? The other piece that we look at is actually the real estate life cycle. And so whether you're looking at acquisition, design, approval, construction, the sale or tenancy, operations or refurbishment, literally all around that life cycle, you're finding changes with technology as companies really work hard on their specific area to say, how can we optimize what it is that we do to make it better for our operating platform? I'm going to start with kind of the future of work. All over the Deloitte website is blasted tons of content on this topic, so if you're interested, go hunt for it. But what this really means is that the use of our assets are changing. We look at what the work is that people may do, who does the work, whether it's an individual or if it's artificial intelligence or robotics, and where it gets. And then the last part is where does it get done? Is it onshore, offshore, nearshore, downtown, suburban, AI? What other kind of components? And when you start looking at this in terms of our real estate asset classes, suddenly it demystifies the whole notion about office and workplace. To us, it's all about the war for talent. And so the where played out when Amazon did its whole North American site selection for 55,000 jobs and 8 million square feet. And it was not about the real estate, it was all about the people and the war for talent and finding that. We were lucky that we helped to lead the Toronto bid and we were able to see all of that play out in the markets. The second piece is who does the work. There's a lot of attention being paid to millennials. Everybody wants those digital natives inside their workforces so that it can make a digitally oriented outcome. But the truth of the matter is it's all 5 generations working together. So as people hunt for talent, it's really that combination that works incredibly well. And then the last piece is on the future of work. Whether you're talking about artificial intelligence, and the other biggie is the expansion of the workforce for, off-balance sheet kind of financing. No longer employees per se, but having the ability to scale up and scale down. So those of us who are consultants do this all the time. You scale up based on projects. But it could equally be throwing something up into the cloud saying, can so-and-so bid on this piece of work that I need, and then having it come back to you in a better quality and pricing context. What we've done at Deloitte is we actually have this proprietary tool called Photo, and this is an example where we went into a population of 6,000 employees at a global financial organization, and we had all of those employees fill out this survey to say, what is it you actually do in your job during the day? And the outcome of that was that we learned that 33% of the jobs could be, or the tasks I should say, could be outsourced, 33% automated, 58% outsourced, 47% done remotely, and 44% offshore. So pretty scary. It means that the way we work is changing. You still need people doing the work. You still need the thinking that goes along with it. But the tasks that people do can be much more automated than they were before. So what does that mean for us in real estate? When you do the utilization studies, or the technical word is the bums in seats analysis, when you actually see who's sitting in their seat during the day, the average office is vacant 40 to 60% of the time. So as a corporate occupier, you're saying, what a great waste of money. Why would I pay for space that's sitting there empty? So there's a huge motivation to do the footprint optimization strategies in order to right-size their portfolio. The offshoot of that is that the footprint per FTE is coming way down. In the old days, it was like 200 square feet per FTE, which the province of Ontario is still using for its planning. Other organizations are down to 180 square feet per FTE, the province of Ontario. And you may have heard about the work that we've done at Deloitte. It's come way down, and we've learned that you can achieve between 90 to 100 square feet per FTE with unassigned seating. So it means that the whole way we work and how we create our office environments has changed, which means the rise of groups like WeWork, Convene, Regis, Instant, Beehive, Spaces, and all the others. They're recognizing that people want more flexibility in their office environment. So the business case around this is reduce your office footprint, increase your productivity because you've created these really cool work environments that people want to be in every day. And so what we're really talking about is living the future today. What does that look like? So smart buildings are, of course, where this is starting to play out, as many of the operating companies and occupiers are saying, let's get smart in the way that we go about our real estate. You know that networks and sensors allow a level of customization for individuals, the way that they experience either the workplace or a shopping mall. And in fact, if you've seen a lot of the work that we've done here at Deloitte, the Edge in Amsterdam through our Bay Adelaide facilities, those utilization studies that we do, they actually track your mobile phone. It's pinging off all the sensors in the building, and we can actually figure out how busy a particular space is. And as an employee, you can say, where is the least busy floor? But at the same time, it helps us with our property management, with some of our waste management systems, and some of the other key pieces leading into, Amy's conversation on climate change. Really, really important in order to enhance that. As we look at these new types of environments, tenants are saying, the way we work is changing, so therefore I want more flexibility in what I do. And so as a result, the owners and the operators are saying, how can we provide that flexibility? So you've seen a lot of the operating companies starting their own version of WeWork, whether investing directly like the case did, or, as Brookfield was involved with Convene and some of the others. So it's allowing flexibility for tenants, it's allowing, conference facilities and all kinds of other models to be able to enhance the overall user experience. In light of all of that, you say, okay, now there's a bunch of data. And the data we're tracking, and we're tracking Sheila's cell phone and Amy's cell phone and everybody here in the building, what happens when it starts floating up to the cloud? Now you have a cyber issue. A couple of months ago, I had this, used to be a phone call, now it's an email, right? An email from the cyber guys on our 8th floor. The geeks that are on the show 24, they're on our 8th floor. And it's like, Sheila, XYZ company in the real estate market has all their data being sold out on the dark web. Oh, this isn't good. Right? And so our real estate business has to become that much more sophisticated with respect to cybersecurity and much better in the way that we go about things.
And all of that applies to privacy concerns as well.
Oh, totally. Totally. With all of that, you end up with predictive analytics. We're collecting all kinds of data on individuals, on systems. Demographic data is, of course, the one that's easily able to be manipulated. It can allow better decision making. So whether you're searching for the war for talent or even valuation for optimal buildings of the future, dealing with the volumes of data, enhancing the tenant experience, and ultimately you're going to see more on property valuation playing out. Now it's in the residential sector, but you'll see much more of that in the commercial sector as people become much more sophisticated in the predictive analytics space. What we've seen is that throughout all components of that real estate life cycle, different companies are playing in this space, and some are targeting it early days now, while others are well ahead. So you've heard about honest buildings on the construction side. One large property developer said it can actually reduce our construction costs by 6 to 7% by using data analytics to the construction process. Looking at space utilization through Vantage. Deloitte's own, Ninja asset management platform out of our Amsterdam practice is amazing to look at asset management. And of course, Yardi and MRI are spending a lot of time looking at finance and operating platforms, and Argus on the property valuation piece. Suffice it to say, right across our life cycle for real estate, everything is being played out, and to sit and just think about our large fixed assets, we really have to think about the operational components there.
Actually, I'm going to go back here. You might have noticed that we're starting to toggle a little bit between what the tenants want, how the owners are responding, what the owners need, and how they need to access tenants' information in order to design properly and manage for their future. Obviously, this particular suite of platforms are particularly useful for owners in terms of understanding what's going on in their buildings, but they require the consent of the tenants in order to obtain the information. Interesting fun fact, BTS, which is a company that initially went forward trying to monitor the GHG flows and energy uses and water and so on in the construction process, something that Honest Buildings relates to, but more broadly, had to completely change the platform of what they were delivering to the marketplace because they found that the data itself is incompatible. And that's another layer of how do you start to prepare your organization for this world of digitization in the future is first order business is getting your data well in hand. So we're going to switch actually now to the investor side of the equation. Having said that, these things are interrelated in very, very meaningful ways. It's not by accident that at this very time where the technology is causing so many businesses to rethink their business model, and the timelines, as Sheila illustrated, are moving in from 10 years, the average term of a lease, to rethinking your business model every 18 to 36 months. Likewise, the investor population is looking for digital solutions to how they can access the real estate market, how they can automate the processes for selecting assets and understanding the power of predictive analytics in their world. So these are some online real estate services that you might have come across. Most people know Zillow because it's taking over the home sale business. Rostify and Blend are debt platforms. Auction.com obviously is an investment sales online tool. And Fundrise and BrickBlock. BrickBlock's my favorite of the blockchain platforms. It's based in Luxembourg, and they actually do funds management as well as ICO offerings on European real estate. This is the beginning of what will be likely an enormous suite of digital products for the investor market. At the extreme institutional investor sector, we're seeing a high degree of engagement on the Proptech space. Oxford and Cadillac Fairview, for example, have launched Proptech platforms that are actual branded operations that are affiliates of their organizations. You see Ivanhoe and Brookfield close behind. I think that the Canadian institutions are leading in this way, the same way they're leading on sustainability initiatives. It's not by accident it's called the Montreal Accord. When the UN first established the Sustainable Development Goals, that initiative was led by BCIMC, Ontario Teachers, and CDPQ. So we're now, as we move forward in terms of talking about the integration of these particular forces in terms of how they affect us in the real estate, one of the technologies I'm most excited about is augmented reality. And there's a whole spectrum of technologies that are under this umbrella, from virtual reality to holograms. And I think that they are some of the most exciting tools for those of us who are real estate service providers to increase the engagement with our customers, who are both the contractors and the suppliers of products, all the way to the tenants and the clients. Like if you run a shopping center, shoppers are part of your stakeholder base. Each of these technologies has a particular attribute that it's best at, and they all have a role in terms of a real estate services platform. I think that these three technologies, and AI is in early days. If you talk about things such as lease abstracting, it's about 60% accurate. Some other things like searching the world for promising materials that will reduce your carbon footprint and maybe save you some money, AI is better at that, because if you have established databases that have a whole body of knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge around them, you can search them much more quickly and easily in order to incorporate those design decisions in early days. You can also render it in 3D. You can get your stakeholders around the table and you can make it real for people, because I think the hardest thing about our business is that very few people have the ability to translate a blueprint into what a 3D experience will be. I suppose that's the specialty of architects, but for the rest of us mortal humans, it's really useful to have these technology tools.
So one of the key parts of the real estate process is, of course, related to operations. And in the cognitive and robotics automation, it can apply to many of those functions. So think about the quarterly reporting, or what used to be known as the fire drill every quarter, whether it's through valuations or investor reporting, right through to some of the accounting and administration, right through to the operations for vendor management. You can imagine how this could possibly change with some of the advanced tools that are out there. This then lends itself to the whole blockchain philosophy and technology that's available. And as I started to dive a little bit more into blockchain, I was trying to think about how do you actually convey what this is to an audience? And it would be like 20 years ago trying to describe the internet to somebody, how it's a distributed kind of platform for all kinds of communications, marketing, and media. Blockchain is really around that for business processes. So think about it that it's distributed, it can be tamper-proof, it's consensus-based, and it's a ledger, which means you can make it transparent, trustworthy, has all kinds of implications for disintermediation, smart contracts, and auditability. So blockchain, in our view, has tremendous opportunities in the real estate market, and we're actually working with some of the folks in our markets looking at some blockchain solutions for their overall operations. So think about our market. We're largely inefficient, labor-intensive, and wildly complex. Think about the average transaction would have anywhere from 9 to 15 participants. The buyer, the seller, the realtor, the underwriter, the lender, a title company, an appraiser, an insurer, an inspector, an auditor, a surveyor. Like, the world is involved in this thing. Everybody has a different opinion, and Lord forbid that building trades 5 years from now, because then you've got to do it all over again, otherwise known as the fire drill. In the U.S. in 2016, there was about $380 billion of transactions, and they forecast that about 4% of that can be a result of mortgage fraud. Forget when we talk about money laundering here in Canada. That's a whole other conversation. Our slow processes, our lack of transparency, our crowded transactions, and inefficiency make us ripe for some blockchain transactions. In a couple of files that I'm involved in right now, by running through this blockchain process, you can reduce the actual participants in the transaction, which then lowers the cost by anywhere from 5 to 8%. Again, in residential sector, building toward affordability overall. And so in fact, it can minimize fraud, it can enhance transparency, it can cut the cost, it can establish central record keeping. In the US, they suggest it's between $2 to $4 billion a year. They say on the real estate transaction side, i.e. the broker side, it can reduce the folks involved by up to 20%. So that's massive when you think about implications for what it is that we do. And again, it's like trying to tell people marketing on the World Wide Web 20 years ago. So we've got about 15 minutes left to present, and we're now into the section that you need to pay close attention to. You mean nothing else was?
Sorry?
Nothing else was?
No. Remember when we started, we were talking about the need for continuous learning? This is the other part of that, which is that it is a unique period of time we're living in where there are so many forces of change coming at us simultaneously. And the solution is something called systems thinking. And it's the ability, as opposed to looking at the decisions in isolation, kind of like Western medicine is famous for, you broke your leg, well, therefore we'll put a cast on your leg and won't worry about your nutrition or how you got to that frail condition in the first place. Holistic thinking is about looking at all of the systems and turning the problem around and seeing how it might last or need more flexibility in the fullness of time and other systems. And since we have these demands on us to invest in significant infrastructure in order to meet these challenges and experience the potential of these technologies, it's really critical that to the extent we can piggyback these technologies to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or better yet, 5 birds with 1 stone, that's what we need to get to. So these are 4 systems thinking examples for how we're going to solve the climate crisis. The upper left-hand corner is a project that Avison is working on with some other vendors that is taking garbage, whether it's organic garbage or even plastic garbage, and converting it through chemistry as opposed to fire to liquid natural gas. So it's deconstructing it to its natural components, sticking it back in the pipeline, and using that as a source of renewable fuel. The middle chart is actually existing today. For the Vancouver Olympics, for the Olympic Village, they built a sewer heat transfer station. So the sewage comes out of all of the properties, and there's about 15 million square feet in this district today in False Creek, and they filter it to take out the solid waste. They take that water and they run it through a double piping system and use reverse refrigeration to transfer the heat from the sewage to the inflowing clean water. And then that water gets distributed back out to all the buildings, the clean water. The sewage goes off to the sewage treatment plant. And they have produced a district in Vancouver where the heating and cooling is done through subfloor water systems, and they have reduced the energy consumption 70%. That's a big deal. You could even take the garbage from those projects, turn it into LNG, and do the 30% that you needed to boost the heat in order to run that district in an ecosystem that is just unique to that neighborhood and just go completely off the grid systems. That's systems thinking. The lower left-hand, we may hear a little bit more about. This is a Sidewalk Labs and Peak Power project in downtown Toronto. These are buildings that have agreed to be part of an off-grid solution for downtown Toronto that includes electric cars and using the energy from those electric cars that are charged at home when the power is half cost to help stabilize the needs of the grid for these buildings in the downtown area. And the real money solution here is the one on the right. I contacted the Nature Conservancy, inspired by the fact that Ethiopia set a record last year in full furtherance of their Paris agreement. They actually managed to plant 324 million trees on a single day in a 12-hour period. So I was curious, and I do have access to the Nature Conservancy, what would that take in Canada if we didn't want to do anything else? We didn't want to change our eating habits, we didn't want to change our driving habits, we didn't want to change the future of the oil industry, we didn't want to improve our buildings. How many trees would we have to plant? What acreage would we need to consume to completely absorb that Paris requirement? And the answer to that question is somewhere between 55 and 100 million acres of trees. Now, those trees need to get to a reasonable maturity level where they're doing their carbon sequestration thing. But think about it. We have 2.6 billion acres of land. 100, 200 million acres of land is like a fraction of a percent of our acreage. We can solve these problems. We just need to engage in systems thinking. Mobility provides us with another example. In order to get to electric autonomous ride-as-a-service solutions, which do tick the boxes in a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, improving access to good employment, improving the egalitarianness of our system, and reducing traffic congestion and GHG emissions, we have to solve all of these problems. This is not just about building better cars. This is about coming up with the financing and insurance structure and the infrastructure to support that. This is not an easy job. This is as complex as this chart suggests. Some of you have heard me say before, no presentation is complete until there's a chart that you actually can't read from the audience, so we might actually have to get this one to you in a white paper in the years ahead. But this is the nature of what we're moving into, and we need to be able to use the power of predictive analytics and our own wits to identify what are the problems and how can we solve them all in one step.
And the other key issue on this is change management. So you can imagine having, autonomous cars in one area but not in another. I heard a speech a little while ago about a fellow that drove from Toronto to Miami and then back again through an autonomous car, Tesla. Who knew that was taking place? They're on all the roads today. But the issue becomes about change management. So whether that's public sector adoption of new traffic patterns, or it's the drivers themselves, or it's the fleets and some of the other components. So it really begs the question, is smart everything inevitable for the cities of the future? Is that really what we're talking about? And the answer is absolutely, definitively yes. The question is, how much do we want to embrace change, and what does that look like? We're going to hear from Sidewalk Labs next about their vision and their opportunity to think about sustainability, mobility, community, the digital platforms, and so on down the road. So I'm really looking forward to that. But having that big aspiration, that big, hairy, audacious goal to say, here's how we can possibly reimagine living in the city. What the focus is for this combination of technology and urban living, the smart cities, accelerated by some of the disrupted technologies, is that overall these technologies are intended to help to lower the unemployment rate. increase GDP, increase some of the office occupancy rates, and overall improve the quality of life for everybody. So when you hear us talking about honest buildings reducing the construction costs by 6%, or blockchain reducing some of the cost structures by 8 to 10 to 15%, you can see those playing out in virtually every aspect of our market and what they could possibly be. It's really an exciting time for all of us to be involved with, taking our physical bricks and mortar and actually tuning them up with technology. We're involved in a project with Evergreen now, looking at the future of Canadian cities and trying to understand the level of both real estate and infrastructure investment to Canada's 200th birthday. There's a wild opportunity for everybody in this room and our industry to accelerate into these disruptive technologies, into understanding the demographics and climate change, to say, here's what we can possibly build in the future.
All right, thank you so much. That was fun. And I'd also like to thank Aird and Verlis for sponsoring this session.